international law in Paris, and I wanted to know how that would look to a law school.
I was just gonna say, it counts, like it won't hurt you at the University of Michigan, right? But most of our entering class won't have advanced degrees, so we're gonna place primary attention on your undergraduate degree. But it's definitely a plus factor for us, right? You've gone on, you've got more experience, but we're not necessarily gonna look at it in terms of like the GPA number, but we're certainly gonna look at it in terms of this person is obviously committed to learning. This person has obviously had richer experiences. Probably someone who's committed to the rigor of a law school environment. But when it comes to like how we're gonna look at the GPA, that's not a number that we're gonna take into account, right? We're gonna look at your undergraduate transcript.
Well, good evening to all. I am Jasmine White. I'm a senior at Fort Valley State University, and I major in political science and minor in criminal justice. But my question for the panel would be, when submitting a resume, what would be your required length? Because some people have a 1 page, some people have long pages, but what would be the, requirement, I guess, for that?
I'd say, again, having an MBA, coming out of business school, I come from a world where 1-page resumes were the way to go. Now, I got out of business school in 1984, so maybe the world has changed since then, but it's not that far ago. That's right. When I got out of business school in '84, they taught us 1-page resumes. I have come to grips with the fact that there are going to be 2-page resumes because there are people who are going to have activities and various things. I think I would like to see 1 page. I can live with 2. Don't go over 2 unless you have a PhD. Because PhDs will have a lot of research, they're writing, dissertation, articles they've written, and I can see how someone who has a doctorate in something will have a rather, I'm sure you have a rather lengthy resume because of the research you've done. But for me, mine's 2 pages, and I've been working for 35 years. So I would say 1 page would be great, 2 pages max.
Okay, I am going to jump in right here. We've actually run out of time, but we have one other question because we did not really cover financial aid as we had hoped. So I would like to ask one of the panelists to tell me what would be your best advice. It's the question we had. What's the best advice for securing the greatest amount of financial aid?
One question?
That's just one question. It's simple, right? Who wants to be the champion of that question?
Sure, we break that up a little bit. There's 2 ways, I think. In part, the student's obligation is to first check your credit. You'll be amazed at how many people don't know what their credit score is. And I say that because credit should be the fallback on if you don't get scholarships. You still have to have a way to pay for it. So if you don't know your credit score, if you don't have a credit history, I would advise you to look at freecreditscorereport.com, FreeCreditGov. The free ways to get your credit report, get that, see what it's like, because you don't want to be surprised about your credit score. Also, the better your grades are, the earlier you apply in the academic process, the more likely you can gain scholarships. And that's why you need to go to each school's website, because while the application process and the review process may be consistent, dates and timeline are important, and you want to make sure that you get as much information about that as possible. You should go to your pre-law advisor now, because there's a lot of third-party organizations that may offer scholarships at law school, and the resources at your campus are a wonderful place to start. Look at your community organizations and see if they have scholarships. A lot of these scholarships and the monies that go along with them go unclaimed every year simply because students don't apply. So if you give yourself more time, that means that you can go ahead and get access to more scholarships. And I know one young lady that applied to our law school that had over $75,000 in scholarships from outside sources, because 2 years prior to law school, she started preparing her applications, because typically the only thing that changes is the date. The application packet is always the same. So she wrote essays and had everything lined up, and then when the applications turned around, she was ready to go. There's no reason everyone can't do that, because if you have the resources, then you can determine where you use them. So hopefully scholarships first from the institutions by grades and the strength of your application, outside organizations, and if you don't get scholarship resources that way, then to look at your credit to make sure that you have a strong enough credit score so that you can apply on your own. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't have a cosigner for my law school loans. So that means that I could only go to law school if I could pay for it on my own. The way that I was able to do that is because I had a high enough credit score where a party would review my credit history and say, because you managed your credit well up to this point, we're going to give you a chance to manage tens of thousands of dollars for your educational expenses. Because I had that support, that option that I gave myself, then I could go to law school. But that was based upon a credit history, which is using credit wisely, which is a much longer conversation. But
Can I ask if there's any need-based, that was a question, is there any need-based scholarships given?
yes, but I think as schools have moved, for example, more schools are giving scholarships that are also not conditioned, even though they're still conditioned upon you staying in good academic standing in your schools. But a lot of that need is a component of that as well. But once again, I would go to each school that you're interested in because there's a ratio. It's usually about 80-20 performance, merit versus need. So I would encourage a conversation with all of our schools and more of the schools that will be here at 6 p.m. to get that information.
I was just going to just talk with the individual schools that you're interested in, because there are also graduate research assistants that schools will offer, where you could go to school with no tuition and paying a stipend and receiving a stipend. So there are a variety of ways, and those will be individual school, the individual schools can answer for you.
And I'll just throw that in, I know it's late, we're behind, but this is really important. Dean McGahee said, apply early. That is so important. It is so frustrating to see these wonderful students come down the pike and say a month to 6 weeks before our deadline, and we've run out of scholarship money, both merit-based and need-based. So apply early. Once you find a school that you're interested in, I think Dean Chester George said, apply like this October 1, or as soon as you find out it. Yes, what she said, what he said, apply early, and then the money will be there, the room will be there, you'll have more time to figure out what your options are. That is so important to getting those need-based and merit-based scholarships.
And I'm going to add, just because this part, we should have talked about this before, this is very important. We all have different perspectives, but apply early and apply often. And what I mean by that, do your homework using the Law School Admissions Council's website. They have a tool, you can plug in your personal background, it tells you the likelihood of certain schools and what schools make sense. Pick a few of them, apply often, and see what happens, see what those scholarship offers are, and then make your determination from there as well.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the panel. Would you all give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you so much. You'll be able to see many of us at the law fair tonight and tomorrow, so you'll be able to follow up with some of the questions that you didn't get to ask today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. You guys look good. My name is Paula. How are you? I have the pleasure. Would you? Oh, okay. While he's doing what he's doing, you're gonna get more information about financial aid right now. This is why I was okay with rushing it out there. So it's gonna be all good. You guys feeling educated? You feel like you've gotten a lot of information? Yes? Yes? I don't know what outside the audience is. Everything has to be interactive, yes? What did you learn today? Tell me one thing. She learned to apply early. It's good, because it's really an important point that we need to do in order to get the most opportunities. Okay, doing good. Okay, what'd you learn? It's important to take control of your life. Snaps to that. Coming to somebody else. What did you learn? Take advantage. What'd you learn? Helpful techniques about writing your personal statement. Awesome. I think I want one more victim. Yeah, what'd you learn? Yeah. Start working on your personal statement. There are people who are in this room and are going to be in this room and in this building for the next 2 days are going to have so much information for you. It can be a little bit overwhelming. Just remember, take it one day at a time. But these 2 days are going to be really important for the next whatever years you're going to spend in terms of going on your law path, right? So I'm congratulating you on taking this step. You ready?
Yes.
Awesome. I would like to introduce Professor Erin Taylor, who is going to be doing a program on managing student loan debt. what you want to know, yes? I actually don't want you to have any. So hopefully that will be the case. You need this? Here you are.
How's everybody this afternoon? My name is Aaron Taylor. As Paula said, I teach law at St. Louis University School of Law. In a previous life, I was a law school admissions dean, and I can tell you the advice that you got in that last panel was golden. I mean, you have people who spend thousands of dollars for that kind of insight. So definitely take to heart what they said, and also, communicate with the folks at the law fair this evening, and also people that you may interact with in the hallways and in the elevators, so on and so forth, throughout this weekend. I'm very happy to be here. I'm sure you have heard a lot of people say, when I came through this process, programs like this didn't exist. That is very true. And the fact that you are here says a lot about your seriousness about considering this endeavor. And information is critical. Information is everything. And so that's one of my main objectives today, is to give you guys some information about student loans, principally around this idea of how you manage student loan debt while still living your life. All right, so let's get the doom and gloom out of the way. Law school is expensive, right? And it keeps going up. If you look at that gold bar, and I guess you can tell the colors, the bar at the bottom, that's the average median tuition for a public in-state student. So if you look at 1993, and I remember 93, is this thing working? Is it going in and out? Oh, okay, all right. I remember 93, that was my senior year in high school. The average median in-state tuition at a law school, at a public law school, was less than $5,000. Imagine tuition being less than $5,000. You can barely get that at like a community college these days. And no, I'm serious. I mean, those are like kind of the access schools, and you can barely get that these days at those schools. Now, that median, at least as of 2012, was over $20,000. And that's the lowest one. You can see public out-of-state and private schools are up $30,000, $40,000 a year. So law school is expensive. So, and you can see the increases, 427% in the last 20 years, 243%, 175%. Those are some significant tuition increases. Overall inflation over that period of time was about 60%. So this stuff vastly outpaces overall inflation. And of course, tuition is only part of the story. So this is kind of the projected student budget for my law school. You look at the top line, tuition is about $39,000. That's a lot of money, right? Just FYI, we heavily discount, and we're like begging people to come, so don't be too intimidated by that number. But $39,000 is a lot of money. But look at all the other stuff. Fees, books, housing, transportation, miscellaneous. What in the world is miscellaneous? Whatever it is expensive. You get to that bottom line, and now you're up to over $60,000. That's a projected budget for the 9-month school year. So tuition is just part of it. The actual cost of attending law school is, 56% more than tuition. And that's not even considering the opportunity cost. What are you giving up by going to law school? Did you quit a job? Did you, give up some other thing? You have to account for those costs as well. And you see that law school becomes an expensive proposition. High tuition equals high debts. Let's look at average debt. So those gold bars, the 2 bars at the top of each graphic, represent the average student loan debt of a law graduate in 2012. So the top graphic is public law schools, the bottom graphic is private law schools. So that average was $88,000 for public law school grads, $127,000 for private law school grads. Now the red bars in the middle represent what that loan actually costs after it's paid off. So the red bar represents the 10-year standard repayment plan, after fees and interest and all that kind of stuff are built in. That increased the cost of that loan about 35%. The bottom line, the blue bar, represents the cost of a loan if you opt instead for the 25-year extended payment plan. And opting for that reduces your monthly payments, but of course it increases the entire cost of the loan about 90%, so it almost doubles the cost of the loan once you've finished paying that off. High debt equals high monthly payments, of course. So the blue line represents the standard monthly payment based on the average debt numbers that we saw before. So $88,000 of debt paid off via the 10-year standard plan is about $1,000 a month every year going to the government. $127,000 in debt paid off via the 10-year standard plan is about $1,400 a month. I mean, that's a payment for a nice house, right? And then the red represents how much it will be via the extended 25-year payment plan. You see, again, the monthly payments go down pretty considerably, but of course, the overall cost of the loan increases because interest accrues and compounds and so on and so forth. So it's almost like pick your poison, right? Now, this isn't a law school issue. This isn't a legal education issue. This is a systematic issue. Student debt tops $1 trillion system-wide. I can remember when I thought $1 trillion was like this mythical number that didn't exist for real. I thought numbers went up to $1 billion and stopped there. Well, apparently there are other levels, and we've reached it as it relates to student loan debt. $1.16 trillion in outstanding student loan debt as of basically right now, second only to mortgage debt. And it's increasing at the highest rate. So you can see the last 2 quarters of last year, in each of the last 2 quarters of last year, outstanding student loan debt increased 11%, each one. The overall was like 4%. So you can see how this stuff is really, really ramping up because more and more people are relying on loans, more and more people are going to school and continuing their education as well. So what have we learned? Law school is expensive, which I'm sure you already knew. Debt is high, which I'm sure you already knew. But now what? And that's the focus of this presentation. This is the now what. Because I imagine many, if not most of you guys are in a position I was in when I was considering law school. It was either I get loans or I don't go. It's as simple as that. I didn't have a wealthy relative who could cut a check for me. I didn't have personal wealth that would allow me to do that. It was student loans and nothing, or nothing. So I want to equip you all with information that you can use in order to decide whether law school is feasible for you. And if you go to law school, how can you live after that? Now, one clarification. The information I'm giving only applies to federal student loans, not private loans. Federal student loans are governed principally by federal law. Private loans are governed by the contract that you sign with the lender. There tends to be much more protections built into federal law as it relates to student loan payment than private loans. So I say all that to say, avoid private loans at all costs. They should be an absolute, utter last resort if for some other reason you can't get loan money from the federal government. Private loans, bad. Federal loans, I mean, they aren't good, but you know, they're better than the private ones, so avoid private loans. So let me talk a little bit about my higher education story. I've been in school, seems like my whole life. I've spent almost as much time in college than I did, my K-12 education. And I started at North Carolina A&T. I got my undergraduate degree in the Aggies in the house.
Got some Rams though.
All right, I'm done, folks. Thank you for your time. I got my undergraduate degree from North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina, HBCU. Then I went to Howard for law school. Excellent 3 years. I'm not going to recruit for Howard today, but it's an absolutely excellent school. Oh, perfect. There it is. All right. And then I thought I was done with school, but I woke up one day and bumped my head. And so went back to school, and 10 years after I graduated from law school, I got a doctorate from Vanderbilt University in Nashville. This stuff didn't come cheap, right? All these degrees, all this education was paid for by over $100,000 in student loan debt. So this is a topic that's near to me because as I stand here today, I'm sure the government's probably taking some money out of my account right now. But it's also dear to me because my education has afforded me, a career and frankly a life that I can only imagine. And I know that the only way I was able to get that education was I had to, put my name on the bottom of that promissory note or those 50 promissory notes. All right, so one of my main research interests in my role as a law professor is higher education law, higher education policy, all that kind of stuff. So I often find myself in conversations about student loans, and one of the things that I find very commonly is that we frame the student loan issue, at least as it relates to repayment, incorrectly. So the hyper focus is, of course, on paying off your student loans. That makes perfect sense. You borrow money, you pay it back, and you're done once that balance hits zero. The thing about student loans, however, is that many debtors, particularly those with the highest balances, people who go to law school, people who go to medical school, so on and so forth, will never have to pay their balances down to zero. They'll never be required to do that. And I'll restate that because that's an important point. Many debtors, particularly those with the highest balances, will never have to pay their federal student loan balances down to zero. And I'll tell you what. Who remembers this guy? Sure, a lot of people would love to forget him. He's our, 43rd president, George W. Bush. And this is him in a signing ceremony in 2007 for a piece of legislation, the College Cost Reduction and Access Act. And this law fundamentally changed student loans. And in the context of this particular talk, fundamentally changed student loan repayment. And here are a couple of headlines that came out. Stop the presses, Bush Congress made college more affordable. Now CNN, HuffPost had its back to school season and Congress finally passes a student aid bill that matters. All of this is an accurate reflection of what this law did. The issue is, it seems like between 2007 and like today, we wanted to forget the Bush years so much that we forgot this law was ever passed. Because if we remember it was passed, we would talk about student loans much differently than we actually do. So let me tell you how this law fundamentally changed student loan repayment. So it created an opt-in income-based repayment system. An opt-in income-based repayment system. And then it also instituted broad loan forgiveness provisions. So let's talk about this income-based repayment system for a moment. So when I graduated law school, I'll never forget I had a P.O. box or something. I walked in the post office expecting probably a letter from somebody that I cared about or something. And I get my first student loan bill. And after I got over the sticker shock, because I opened it right there, I didn't remember borrowing all that money. I mean, I promise I didn't, but unfortunately they didn't care if I remembered or not. But my payments were set based on the repayment plan that I was in. At that time, I was in a 10-year repayment plan. So my payments were set based on, how much I owe, plus interest, divided by 120 for each month that I would be in my payment plan. It didn't matter whether or not I could afford those payments. I borrowed the money, I had to pay back what I borrowed. That was the system that existed previous to 2007. What we have now, however, is a system that actually takes into account your ability to pay. It's called the Income-Based Repayment Program, often referred to as IBR. So via this program, via federal law, if you opt in, and I'll talk about how you opt in later, if you opt in, you cannot be required to make student loan payments that constitute a hardship, a financial hardship. You're capped at the level at which those payments become a hardship, irrespective of how much you actually owe. So what is a hardship? How is hardship defined? It mainly depends on when you got your first student loan. So if you got your first federal student loan before October 1st of 2007, then a hardship is any payment obligation that accounts for more than 15% of your discretionary income. If you got your first student loan on or after October 1st, 2007, then a hardship is any payment obligation that exceeds 10% of your discretionary income. So those folks who came in later, which is frankly just a quirk of when you were born, I guess, you have much better terms of repayment, even though both are better than the system that I graduated from law school under. Now, discretionary income is your adjusted gross income minus 150% of the poverty rate for your family size. I won't go into the details of what all that means. What I'll do is I'll kind of illustrate how this thing works. I came up with kind of 3 fictitious debtors just to kind of illustrate to you guys what these payments will look like. So our first fictitious debtor has a household adjusted gross income of $65,000. Household size is 1, so it's just the debtor, no dependents, no spouse or anything like that. 150% of the poverty threshold for a household size of 1 is almost $18,000. So you subtract that from the adjusted gross income, and you see you have a discretionary income of a little more than $47,000. So those folks who got their first student loan on or after October 1st, 2007, or say if this fictitious debtor was in that position, then she could not be required to make student loan payments above about $400 a month. If she was under the 15% cap, her payments could not exceed about $600 a month. Now, there's a piece of information that might strike you as missing from this profile, and that is the amount of debt that this fictitious debtor actually has. And the reason why that's not up there is because it's irrelevant. These caps still apply. This person can have $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 in debt, and these caps still apply. If you opt into the income-based repayment system, you cannot be required to make payments that represent a hardship. And this is hardship, or this is what the cap, the top of the hardship is. Now, so you can see 394.54, 591.81. Let's go back to those payment obligations that we looked at earlier. So you can see how much lower the income-based payments can be, at least for someone making that kind of salary, about $65,000. Because again, these payments here are divorced from what you can actually afford to pay. This is just, again, your debt plus interest divided by the number of months in your repayment plan. That's all this is. Doesn't care about what your situation is, your financial situation. This is what that calculation is. But income-based payments takes into account, again, what you make. So it kind of removes your grand total debt from the equation and puts in what your adjusted gross income is, and that's how your payment is set. All right, so your payment caps, or I should say your payments themselves, will rise or fall based on your salary and based on your family size. And each year you would have to kind of update the government of how much you made, whether or not, your family size grew, maybe found some kids somewhere or something. That'll go into the calculation. You'll have to update this stuff on an annual basis. So same salary, household size is 2. So it's a debtor and another person. 150% of the poverty threshold, about $24,000. You subtract that from 65. And again, you get what the payment obligations are. This debtor, if they're under the 10% cap, cannot be required to pay more than $343 a month, irrespective of how much debt that debtor has. Under the 15% cap, you see it's a little over $500 a month. And you can look at the percentage of AGI. That's a very useful indicator of how much these payments are. 6% of AGI for the 342. Most people's car payments take up more than 6% of their adjusted gross income. 9.5% of AGI, that's kind of high to me. I mean, I like to think 10% and under is probably a doable rate. Anything over 10%, it kind of gets dicey. So this is kind of right at what I consider to be my comfort level as it relates to student loan payments. But this stuff is much more doable, again, than what it was when I came out of law school. So this fictitious debtor has a much higher salary. So $95,000, that's a very solid salary. Small household size, just the debtor herself or himself. You see what 150% of the poverty threshold is. Discretionary income is $77,000 and some change. And you can see the payment obligations for this debtor is higher. This debtor makes more money, doesn't have dependents or anything like that, so they're going to be on the hook for a larger portion of their debt. But still, what if this debtor had $500,000 in debt? Then these payments are a deal, right? And then of course, hey, the debtor might get married, spouse may not work, might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, and guess what? They won't have to pay anything probably on their student loan once all that is factored in. But you see how this thing works. It's dependent on, again, your household income or adjusted gross income and your family size. Those are the 2 factors that are most important in this analysis. Now, let me throw a little cold water on that. Well, not yet. Cold water is coming. So, invariably, if you have folks making income-based payments, at some point, you're going to want these payments to end, right? You don't want to just have to make these payments until, you're 80, 90 years old. So, built into the College Cost Reduction and Access Act are loan forgiveness provisions that did not exist before. When I came out of law school, there were 2 ways you could get rid of, I guess 3 ways you get rid of your student loans. You either pay them down to 0, you either got a total and permanent disability, not a total and temporary, total and permanent disability, or you die. Those were the 3 ways you got rid of your student loans. That was it. Now there are a few other options. Those 3 are still available, actually, if you want to take any of them. But now there are some other options. You can apply to have your loans forgiven after a certain time period of making payments. Now, your mandatory repayment time frame is dependent on the date of your first loan or the type of job you have. So if you got your first loan before October 1st, 2007, then you have to make income-based payments for 25 years. Then you can apply to have whatever's left over after you made those payments forgiven. 25 years is a pretty long time, right? But hey, hopefully your education pays off and you see the benefit of it so you won't mind making that payment for 25 years. If you got it on or after October 1st, 2007, then your repayment period is 20 years. A little better, still, a pretty long time. Now, here's the cold water. The good news is the remaining loan balances are forgiven. So if you have $50,000, $100,000, $300,000 left over after you've made those mandatory payments, they will go away. The bad part is they're going to be counted as income in the year that they're forgiven. So imagine, you go to bed one night and you're like, okay, I make $65,000. I'm doing pretty well, whatever. I wish I made more. And then the next day someone tells you, guess what? You did make more. You made $100,000 more. Remember that money that you had forgiven a week ago? You're going to be taxed as if you made $165,000. Just add that forgiven piece to your actual salary. You're looking around like, I don't see where that $100,000 went to or whatever. So for many debtors, it'll be trading a student loan debt for a tax debt, though not dollar for dollar, which is a good thing. But I'm hopeful that this will be fixed because it has potential of being a nightmare scenario for a lot of people. And the reason why I'm hopeful is because the first wave of people who would be affected by this are still about 20 years away. So this problem won't even reveal itself until about 2030 something. So there's time for Congress to say, okay, this is a slow motion train wreck happening here, let's do something about this. Now, I don't have much faith in Congress, to be honest. I don't have much faith in the political system in DC or frankly in most of the states either. But this is the reason why I'm still hopeful on that point. The type of people who will be affected most significantly about this or by this are people who have undertaken a lot of debt in order to continue their education. So you're talking about doctors, you're talking about lawyers, you're talking about MBAs, you're talking about PhDs, you're talking about people who, like me, have been in higher education almost as long as they were in K-12 education. So those are the people that politicians tend to pay attention to. If this was an issue of poverty, if this was an issue that affected poor people disproportionately, I would have absolutely no hope that there will be a fix because we know how America works. But because this is a solid middle class problem, because this is a professional class problem potentially, then I think there is some hope that there will be a fix to this. But for you guys, and you can, kind of accept this advice to the extent that you feel it's appropriate. For you guys, this problem is still like 25 years away minimum. So you're talking about a quarter century before you wake up one day and all of a sudden made 100,000 that you never saw. So just in your consideration of this, think about this and think about the implications. But then also think about in those 25 years is if there is something you can do to lessen the potential effects of being hit with this tax obligation. Now, if I threw cold water with this news, I'm about to throw hot water. Is hot water good? I know cold water is like bad. Is hot water good? Whatever the good version of water is, I'm about to throw some on that. So there's another program. Remember when I said your mandatory repayment window is determined by the date of your first loan or the type of job you have. Well, there's a program called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, if you work in a public service job for 10 years, you can make income-based payments and you can have your remaining balance forgiven with no tax hit on the back end. Let me say that again. If you work in a public service job, you can make income-based payments for 10 years, 120 months, and at the end of that period, you can have your remaining balance forgiven forever with no tax hit on the back end. Now, 25 years is a long time, 20 years is a long time, 10 years is a blur. Trust me, you're gonna go to bed one night and wake up and it's gonna be 10 years later. Especially once you get out of school and that, kind of academic calendar ritual goes away, the days, months, years bleed into each other. 10 years, you can do that in a breeze. Now, that's the definition taken verbatim from the legislation of what a public service job is. You don't have to read all that gibberish. I've highlighted the two most important parts: government jobs and jobs with 501c3 nonprofit organizations, which is most of the nonprofit organizations in this country. If you work for either of those, local, state, federal, or if you work at a 501c3 nonprofit organization, you qualify for this program. Now, this program is important to me because, like I said, I know a whole lot of y'all are in a similar position as I was, where it's student loans or nothing else. Student loans or you don't go to school. So I see this program in the context of like social justice and access and all these kinds of things because it provides resources to people who don't have them, while also allowing them a way to get from under the burden of the debt that they had to take on. I don't know if any of you have had conversations with people. I know this is a familiar refrain that I hear when I talk to law students. It's, when I came to law school, I wanted to save the world, but then I got here and I took on all this debt, and then I realized that I had to go and, chase money in the private sector. I had to represent, big oil companies and insurance companies and all these types of organizations. Because I couldn't afford to work in nonprofit, or I couldn't afford to be a public defender with the type of student loan debt I had. And what I tell them, and what I want you to tell people whenever you hear this assertion, is that it's patently untrue. Not just untrue, it's patently untrue. This program was written specifically to incentivize people to go into public service type jobs and not have to worry about paying off their student loans. Because you're going to make income-based payments for those 120 months, and then your debt is going to go away forever with no tax hit. This program is for those exact people. So if you have aims of saving the world, if you have aims of being a public defender, if you have aims of working with, organization that helps the homeless, so on and so forth, do not let student loan debt deter you from that. Because there is a clear avenue for you. Even clearer than it is for other people. There's a clear avenue for you to do those types of jobs. All right, so I talked earlier about opting in. So after you finish your academic program, you get, of course, a 6-month grace period before you have to start making payments. If you don't say anything to your lender, you're going to be put into the standard 10-year repayment plan. That's kind of the default repayment plan. If you want to make income-based payments, you have to opt in. And what I mean by opt in, you have to essentially fill out an application. And you can find that application at studentloans.gov. You can find that application as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that is pertinent to your loan situation. And basically, it's just going to ask you a lot of personal information. The most important part is your financial information, so you should have like your tax forms or your W-2s or whatever available to input that. So you have to complete this request. It's not, I call it an application. It's not technically an application, it's a request. You have to complete this request before you're able to make income-based payments. Here's another site that's very helpful, studentaid.ed.gov. And it has a whole lot of relevant information about student loans, a whole bunch of links to places and download some PDFs if that's your thing, whatever it is. When you're looking for information about federal student loans, I always recommend that you only use the .gov websites, .gov. There are a whole bunch of other sites that purport to offer information about student loans. Some of them are very good, some of them are absolutely atrocious. And so you don't want to become victimized by bad information, just rely on the .gov websites. All that information is correct, it's federal law. And then the last site, remember earlier I was talking about discretionary income is your AGI minus 150% of the poverty and all that kind of stuff. I didn't go into the details of all of that because at studentloans.gov, there are calculators that will do all that math for you. So here, you go and you put in your loan balance, you put in your interest rate, and actually you can log into an account and it'll all just be automatically populated. So you don't even have to know, your interest rate or your balance and all of that. And then out comes this thing right here, and it tells you all of the different payment plans. You can see what your payment obligations would be under each one. You can see what kind of loan forgiveness you could potentially qualify for. And then you can say, okay, this is the best one for me. I'm going to try to get into or enroll into that particular program. All right. So those are some links too, and I want to make this publicly available. Actually, you can find it on Prezi, though I have no idea how to tell you to do that. But it is publicly available as right now, but I'm going to try to make it publicly available in some other way. My email address is here, all my contact information is here. If you have any questions whatsoever about student loans, financial aid, whatever it is, please, please, please shoot me an email, or you can even just add me on Twitter. All right, I'm done. Any questions?
Could you read out your email?
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, it's ATAYLO. I should have put that in black, I guess. ATAYLO. So A Taylor, though, without the R. 65 at SLU.edu.
Does military service count as?
Absolutely, public service. Yeah, and then of course, there are other programs for military as well that could bring down your student loan debt. But yeah, military service is probably quintessential public service.
How long after you graduate do you have to opt in for the,
It's whenever you choose. Because the thing is, it's advantageous to you to do it as soon as possible because you want the clock to start.
okay, right.
So, like my situation, I was in repayment probably close to 10 years before these options came around. So, I could benefit from them, but it would have been way better could I have benefited from them 10 years ago. I would have been done by now, essentially. So, you can opt in whenever you want, but it's advantageous to you to do it as soon as possible because you want to lower your payments, obviously, and you want your clock to start.
And if you don't opt in and they place you in the default two-year payment plan, do you have to stick with that, or can you
No,
change?
you can change whenever. But again, sooner the better. And you have a 6-month grace period. So between, before that 6-month grace period is up, that's ample time to go in and take care of all this stuff. Because I'm telling you, the sticker shock on that standard payment plan is it'll take your breath away.
Mr. Taylor, thank you for all the invaluable information. I actually have a follow-up question to that as well. So if you do enroll in the income-based repayment, and you like, if you take a year off, a gap year from your undergrad and grad school, and then you want to go to law school, does that time still count?
Yeah.
Or, because you're not making any income, I guess?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be consecutive.
Okay.
And then also, the thing is, you have a lot of people making income-based payments, but they aren't making actual payments at all.
Okay.
Because either they don't have income, or they have very low income to where it doesn't exceed that 150% of poverty.
Like the 10 years still.
But the clock is still ticking. Now, if you're in school, you're not doing public service. I mean, unless you're keeping your job on the side. So what happens with that, whether you're talking about the 10-year public service plan or the 20-year just regular IVR plan, it doesn't have to be consecutive. So you can work 5 years in public service, then do a handful of years in the private sector, then come back to public service, and after the end of that second 5 years, that's when you would apply for forgiveness.
And my other question was, how does consolidation affect your payments? So, because I've heard that, for example, a lot of us who've been in college for 4 or plus years from undergrad, you didn't take that loan out at one time. You already have a few different loans. So, how does consolidation affect your being able to get income-based repayments?
Yeah, I typically recommend that everybody consolidates. I mean, sometimes, you know, there may be a higher interest rate on a consolidated loan than what you would have on some of the individual loans, but it's just so much easier to just have one loan rather than having to worry about 3-4 different payments. To your question, how it affects it, the bigger the balance, obviously, the more likely you are to qualify for income-based repayment. I guess technically it doesn't affect it much at all because they'll just do the math separately. You know, you have 5 loans of 100,000 as opposed to just one loan of 100,000. But just from a convenience standpoint, I recommend that you consolidate. And then another point, you have to have a direct loan in order to qualify for this program. In other words, only direct loans qualify for income-based repayment. So if you have a Perkins loan doesn't qualify for income-based repayment unless you consolidate and essentially turn it into a direct loan. So if you have federal loans that don't qualify on their own, you can consolidate them and get one direct loan, and then that loan will qualify for all of this. Oh, 1 minute? Oh, done, okay, all right. I'll talk to you. Thank you, guys.